runs a funeral home. And he said, I want help making our website do more than it currently does. He says, I want it to do obituaries and where people can like leave messages for the family and stuff like that. And then they also want to be able to generate sales off of it. So I'm going to take a look through their website. And it does most of that. Literally, it's got this amazing Facebook integrated messages for your loved one kind of thing, where it'll display all the obituaries of everyone who's recently passed, and a little section where you can write down whatever you like, and then it'll actually connect to Facebook and Twitter and all this crazy stuff. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. This guy doesn't even know that he's paid for this.
He's paying, or you
Paying. Yes, he's doing a monthly payment on this. And so he's working, he doesn't know it, but he's working with this very high-end company that can provide him everything he wants. And he just came to me because he doesn't quite, at least he just doesn't quite understand anything. So that's kind of where I think a lot of the web design, print design debacle comes in, is where just print designers sometimes just don't understand everything that the web can do. You see Facebook and it looks really cool, and they just say, I want that on my website. Which part of it? How deep do you want to go down the rabbit hole? How much money do you have? So I thought I'd ask you guys, do you have any horror stories? Do you have any clients from hell who have, you have any clients from hell yet?
Well, I still have the Moroccan family friend.
Oh yeah.
Who's been trying to learn how to do the website like from the internet. And he keeps messing up. And he's like, I tried to install something and now it doesn't work. Come help me.
Yes, not only are you doing a service for them, but you're also tech support. Mm-hmm. So I found a really nice list of places where you can go and actually get some of the training. Some of these came from IDEX. And then the different languages that you can learn. But print designers, I find, are often very terrified of web stuff because they know it's a lot of programming. And designers want to work with pretty pictures. They don't want to get out of Photoshop. They want to move something and have it stay in that spot. And web design to learn about. I graduated college in 2000, and I had taken one web design class. And in it, I learned about half of what I now teach in my Web 101 class. So it's come a long way. But when I started, it was table-based designs and the really, really simple HTML, and we were dealing with GIFs and JPEGs, and that was it. CSS didn't even really exist yet. So as these new technologies came out, it wasn't that big of a deal for me to learn them because, okay, CSS comes out. It's like 180 new little commands. You need about half of them, and you can just integrate it into anything you're doing. Awesome. Well, I was able to pick that up in like a week or two. And then JavaScript had been out for a while. I kind of didn't want to learn it, and I still don't want to learn it, but I picked up the basics along the way. So over the course of the last 15 years or so, when a new thing comes out, I've picked it up. So for a print designer starting now, you have this huge history that is often very, very, very intimidating. The nice thing is that most people by now have figured out HTML and even the basics of CSS, even print designers. So, and all of you guys know this stuff. So, yeah, have you read? All of my slides are, almost all of them are really, really funny. Not this. So here's the stuff that you guys probably already know. RGB versus CM1K, 72 versus 300. Print designers, I've worked with some where it's cool to work with a 2 gigabyte Photoshop file. And the quality is amazing. And then they go to the web and they're like, why doesn't it look as nice? I'm like, because we have to worry about cell phones and 28K modems and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, file size optimization is still incredibly necessary mostly because of cell phones. 3G and 4G networks are not the fastest thing in the world, and they're not going to be for a while. They're faster than a 56K modem, but they still take a while. I think everybody knows JPEGs are for photographs, GIFs are just animation, and then PNG is when you want to have really, really nice transparency. In Photoshop, you can have 50% transparency, lots of ghosted images. You can do that with a PNG 24, but you can't really do it with a GIF. It's really crappy with a GIF.
Why is there a PNG?
So when GIF came out, the patent is owned by CompuServe, and some people wanted to get around that so that they could make their own versions of it. PNG 8 is just a open source ripoff of GIF. There's nobody. Well, that's not entirely true anymore. Chrome and Firefox are increasingly popular. I went to work on my grandfather's computer, and I was wiping it and resetting it up, and I was like, I'm going to set you up with Firefox. This is a little better than Internet Explorer. And he goes, I really like that Chrome browser. I was like, yeah, Grandpa, let's get it. And you'll also hear these two terms, designers and developers in the web world. And there is a distinct difference between the two. And so designers are typically the front-end people, the people that make it look pretty, HTML, CSS. Photoshop, every designer loves Photoshop. And then the developer people. PHP or some equivalent thereof. If you've ever cracked open Dreamweaver and when you see when you go File New and it'll tell you all the different types of files that'll make and all the ones that you don't recognize, those are the stuff that developers do. PHP is the most popular one right now. About 50% of enterprise level websites are running PHP because it's free and open source. And it is a very, very high quality product, but and I'll explain more about what it does here in a second. SQL is your databases, and then there's sort of this in-between area, JavaScript. Because primarily JavaScript runs in the browser. It doesn't run on the server where PHP runs. And its purpose is to make the page interactive, make it do stuff. But it requires programming. So it's kind of the bridge between back end and front end. Usually JavaScript people are called developers, but sometimes they're called designers too. Everyone in here should know about validation, right? Lisa, you heard about validation before? No? Oh, okay, this is good. So there is actually a grammar to HTML. There's a proper way to do it. And there's the same for CSS and mostly the same for JavaScript. And these three websites, or the first two, will actually take your HTML file, you can upload it, and it will tell you what line you've got an error on. This is how I grade my student work. So the first thing I do is I just run it through this, because it'll tell me where the errors are. And this is not, I didn't put it on the little handout, did I? No, I didn't, I forgot that. But if you simply look for HTML validator, and validator is not a real word, everything that you type in will try to correct it. You get little squiggles under it. If you ever end up doing any JavaScript work, Firebug is the plugin that you want to use. It's a plugin for Firefox, and the equivalent in Chrome is actually built into it. It has it's the JavaScript validator is essentially what it is, and it's just called the JavaScript console. It's under the menu somewhere, and when you write your JavaScript or your HTML or your CSS, run it through this, and it'll tell you where the errors are without you having to run the page and try and figure out, oh, there's a delimiter showing up on my page for some odd reason. This will tell you where it is. I do want to say that, another thing that you should be worried about is something called the doc type. At the beginning of, and yeah, most everybody knows about this part, but at the beginning of every HTML document, there's this one line of code that you're supposed to have that starts out the word !doc type. And then XHTML and HTML 4.0 have this huge, long, horrible thing. If you got one character wrong, the page wouldn't validate. Then the validators understood what your page was doing. It's like, I don't know what this is, so everything's wrong. So in HTML4, there were 3 different doc types. And what they did was they actually linked back to another document on the web that was the rules for that particular form of HTML. And so when the validator would try to run your page and see where your mistakes were, the first thing it has to do is load up the rule set. And if it can't find it, it breaks and goes nuts. HTML 4.01 had 3 versions of the doc type. Then came along XHTML, and it also had 3 different versions. Transitional, strict, and frames, all 3 of them. And the transitional was supposed to be they would accept more tags. The strict one was these are the tags you're allowed to use and anything else is wrong. And then frames was this awful idea that had been around for a long time where you can make one page bring in multiple HTML pages, and it's dead and no one uses it, and thank God it's gone. Don't Google it, nothing, just let it die. And then you've probably heard of HTML5. And you've heard that this is going to save the rainforests and unicorns will poop rainbows when you finally get into HTML5. And HTML5 is here. It's perfectly usable now, and they came out with one doc type. And it's delimiter, exclamation point, doc type, space HTML, delimiter. That's it. They were like, this doc type stuff is stupid. And it was. There's no reason that the browser needed to have all that, but it is still an incredibly essential part of this because one of the weird things that will happen in a browser is if the doc type's not there, or if any part of your page fails validation, browsers do something called corpse mode. They actually stop rendering the page as soon as they hit an error. You don't see this. It takes just a couple milliseconds for it to figure this out. But then the browser basically stops what it was doing, takes the page out of memory, switches over into this corpse mode where it tries to gloss over the mistakes that you would have made. It's a different rendering engine that tries to just power its way through anything that's not the perfect way that the computer wants it. IE6 was notoriously bad for its corpse mode. Virtually everything in CSS went awry when it went into corpse mode. If you put a width in, it would suddenly be different. If you've dealt with CSS, you know that there's padding and there's width and there's margin and they don't add up quite right. Well, Internet Explorer would do them completely different. So suddenly everything just breaks and goes wrong. But it was only in corpse mode. If you validate your pages, everything works out. You will find your mistakes. Print designers don't typically have to do that. The closest they really get is InDesign's pre-flighting, where you get your fonts and your images and all that kind of stuff. So, getting into web design from a print designer standpoint. There's a lot of stuff you gotta learn. HTML and CSS are not a big deal anymore. Most everybody has at least a cursory understanding of it. If you're a print designer, Photoshop and Illustrator are probably already in your bag. No big deal. It's JavaScript, PHP, and SQL that is scaring the pants off me. Because those are big, heavy programming languages where there are no pretty pictures, there are no icons, you just have to type this weird, archaic, hieroglyphic language that no one understands, and these guys who live in basements and don't see the light of day, they're the only one, they're the keeper of the gates to that type of stuff. So
why is JavaScript on there twice?
Because I meant to put SQL.
It's very important.
So for people who've never gotten into the development side of things, there's kind of this mystical quality to it. It seems like this you need to speak these hocus pocus words in order to even understand why do you need PHP? Like, they get the idea that it kind of does the logins and the searches and stuff, but why can't HTML just do that? Why do I need all of these crazy programs to do this stuff? So here's how everything kind of works together. Your HTML and CSS, everybody kind of gets that, content versus presentation. Well, you also have to have data. You have to store that somewhere. When you log into Facebook and you put in your information, your personal information, and then you put all of your statuses, all that has to go in a database. And the common database format that everybody loves is called SQL. There's some other weird ones, but 95% of everyone uses SQL. It stands for Structured Query Language. Don't remember that. So you've got this database, and databases are a world unto themselves. They're used in everything. They're not just used on the web. And learning how to properly structure databases, people often assume it's like a slightly better version of Excel. And that's an okay way of looking at it, but databases don't function like it. Yeah, they're not Excel. Access is a good primer for databases. If you've ever played with Microsoft Access, you can store all kinds of crazy different data in it, and you can link the data together. And that's the major thing that databases give you, is you can link information to other information. So I can have a table that says, here's all of my users. And I have another table that here's all of their orders. And so one person can fill out as many orders as they want and come back to the website. It just puts each of those in a separate table. PHP is kind of the language that's used to connect the data sources, which doesn't just have to be your database, but it is able to take that information and then spit it out into your HTML. If you think of it that way. And the problem is that this has to happen back on the server. It doesn't happen in the browser. It has to happen before the page is even created. I know that doesn't make too much sense now, but if you actually take my PHP class, it'll make a lot of sense. And I'll show you some tutorials here in a minute. PHP can also grab information from cookies. Not that cookie, but everybody's heard of cookies. Sessions. You've probably seen your session is timed out. Well, session is an actual thing in programming and on the web. It's not just timed out. There's an actual thing called a session, and it stores information. All the forms that you create on the web, PHP can interact with that data and manipulate it and move it around and let you store it in the database and pull it out and make changes to it and all that kind of stuff. And both SQL and PHP have to reside back on the server. Then there's JavaScript. JavaScript usually lives in your page. Nowadays, it's mostly jQuery, which is the one that I really, really recommend that you learn. And yeah, JavaScript has become an incredibly powerful tool with the advent of something called AJAX. A couple of years ago, some guys, some very smart guys came up with Google Maps. And you know how the cool thing is you can grab the map, you can move it around. But if you move it too far, you get a gray space, right? And then you have to wait a second. And then the image kind of comes in low res, and then it comes in high res, and you've got it. Well, JavaScript is responsible for that. What it's doing is it's watching what is viewable in the viewport right now. And as you pull this around, it says, oh, I need coordinates X, Y, Z. So it sends a request out to the server and brings it right back. Brings back the appropriate image, and then it's responsible for putting it in the right place. So JavaScript can make those kinds of interactive things happen. And it can do them on the fly, if necessary. For the most part, what JavaScript is being used for at the onset of learning JavaScript is you make sliders and you make form validators. You make nice little picture sliders that go across the top of your home page, and then you make it so that your forms, when they fill out something wrong, a little message pops up. If you're going to learn JavaScript, that's the first things that I suggest that you do with it.
What is
AJAX it stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And it's a horribly long word for, it's not a particular technology. It's a way of doing things. You ever play with AJAX? You played with Spry in Dreamweaver. Yeah, that was Adobe's answer to AJAX. So Google Maps was considered AJAX, but it's not a particular language. It was just, how can you bring JavaScript and data and HTML all together to make things a little bit more user-friendly? And the big thing was being able to grab the map and pull it around. It behaves more like a piece of software, like Photoshop, where you can actually do the hand thing and move it around, rather than what MapQuest used to be, which was in all 6 corners it had little arrows, and you had to click on that arrow, and then it sent another request back, and then the page would reload, and your image would move halfway in that direction. And they just wanted to sort of eliminate that, so it was a little bit more responsiveness. Was probably the big thing that they wanted. Ajax is kind of an old term now. People don't really use it quite as much, but it's the precursor to just being able to do JavaScript-y things now. Yeah, everything in your site through just a couple of files. We can have 100 HTML documents in our site, and we link them all to the same CSS file and the same JavaScript file. And that way, I can make one change in the CSS, and it will update every single headline across the site. I can change the color of anything, everything, with one CSS file. I have seen print designers who don't understand that that concept and have literally put the exact same CSS in the head of it. And, yeah, this way everything is much more manageable. Everybody knew that. Yeah, it's like the little heading things that you've got in Word, and then the paragraph styles in InDesign. Yeah, that's exactly what classes in CSS are. Okay, more funny pictures. So I told you about the different doc types of HTML. CSS is going to be, it's becoming less of a pain, but it's got weird quirks all the time. And it has some, the people who made it just do not get designers. If you ever tried to center a div, it makes sense if you understand programming, but doing margin left, right, auto to center things, what idiot came up with that? It wasn't an idiot. It was actually a very smart programming technique, but they always think of something different. Every browser does something different to your page. JavaScript and PHP are incredibly difficult to learn, and SQL will get you a lot of money if you become a database admin. Testing. All of this stuff, none of it works the first time. I did have a student who logged in, fixed his assignment, didn't test it, and just assumed that it worked perfectly. Basically broke it even worse when he did that. Yep, and web developers make more money than print designers. Yeah, that's what I did when I read about that. So those are the core languages. The whole, did everybody get a copy of the little handout thing? So there's JavaScript and PHP and SQL and then HTML, CSS, but then they keep coming out with other stuff to make your life easier. Some of these are sort of core programming languages like C++, or C#, C++, Java, .NET. Those are kind of older languages that have been around for a while, but some of these are web-specific things. There are a million little frameworks. You may have heard of these before. If you've heard of Bootstrap, it was designed by the team at Twitter, and what they wanted to do was make CSS a little bit easier so that you could just apply some classes on stuff. Everything kind of ends up looking, all the websites end up looking the same, but it's got all that responsive mobile design built into it. So as the page shrinks down, it automatically just resizes itself, and all the CSS just takes care of it. There are JavaScript frameworks, because JavaScript I found is one of the harder languages to teach, and it's also one of the harder languages to program in. MooTools, YAML, and jQuery are the big ones. jQuery being the biggest one. It has almost entire dominance, especially now that it's integrated into Dreamweaver. And then, if any of the rest of these look familiar, I mean, even now, I don't know half of these. I'm not going to learn half of them. You're going to pick a couple that help you with the jobs that you typically do, and you're going to stick with them. jQuery, I think, is one of the most useful ones.
What does MooTools do?
It's very similar to jQuery. It's kind of the same thing. So jQuery was written because when all the designers, they wanted to do this cool stuff, there's rollover things that we can do and move stuff around, and designers couldn't understand the JavaScript syntax. It has lots of weird quirks in it, and it's just bizarre. So what some very smart people did with jQuery is they said, let's build a JavaScript library that lets you use JavaScript as though it were CSS. So it borrows a lot of the ideas from CSS. You can actually grab things in the same way that you can selectors in CSS. So you can actually say dot class name and then give it animate dot jump around or whatever, and it will do the jump around to anything with a class of whatever you say. Yeah, and I'm sure by this time next year, I could probably double this list. And right now, this is just a random sampling of PHP, JavaScript, and CSS frameworks, and some other ancillary languages. But you can. This is a tenth of what exists right now.
So why are they? Why? I'm just gonna leave. Why are there 83 different ways to do something?
I didn't leave this comic in, but there was one that was. There are 14 standards for doing X. Well, we should come up with a standard that incorporates all of those. And the next panel is there are now 15 universal standards for this thing. And that's kind of what ends up happening. Like jQuery can probably solve a lot of problems, but MooTools is also out there, and it can do some stuff. YAML? Yi. That's Yahoo's JavaScript framework. Different people try to solve the same problem, and these are all the different things that are out there. So you can pick the one that you want. Do you want to know the one that everybody knows, or do you want to pick one that no one else knows so nobody can mess with your stuff?
Depends.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and say that one of these is better than the other, but I'll probably tell you learn at least a couple of them. Learn one in each major category, and I'll go over those in just a second.
What is the difference between bash and shell?
Sess?
Yes,
I'm not sure. Less is a way of putting variables in CSS. So you can say, instead of saying all fonts are equal to whatever, color colon red, you put color colon, and you can just like make up a font name. And just say X essentially, and and you just say X X X X X X X all the way down through your document. At the very beginning, you say X equals red, and it just sort of fills it in everywhere. I haven't played with Sess, so I don't know. Do you know?
No, I don't know, but it's getting a little bit with football. And I think it's that. It's S-A-S-S. And I think it's like a lot of CSS rules put together in a library or something like that.
Okay.
But
I'm not entirely sure stats either. And there are a million things out there that I don't know, and again, I'm not going to learn all of them. You don't need to know all of them. You need to know a couple of them well. That's what I'm going to tell you. So, that has happened. As a student, we sat for 2 hours after class one day trying to find a period out of place in 500 lines of code. When the end came, we were both ready to flip the table. Yeah, and it was wow, I hated it. And then, when it finally works! And everybody hates Hofstadter because he's right. Every project, it takes 10 times longer than you think. In fact, the general rule of thumb is you spend about 10% of your time actually doing coding. You spend 90% of your time doing research, figuring out how to do what it is you want to do. And I know that's terrifying to designers.
No. Back that up.
Oh, sorry.
10% of the time actually doing it, and
90% reflecting and researching.
trying to make it happen because somebody asked you to do a particular thing or you want to do a particular thing?
Right, so think of it as you're going to design this incredibly complex piece of machinery. We should not just dive in and start putting gears together. You should map it out, build your blueprint, test some things. Build a couple of the cog parts and see if you can get it to work. And if that's doing weird things or unexpected things, figure out why. Okay, now I have that problem solved. How is that going to mesh when I actually combine these parts together? And you don't really do that in the computer. You kind of do that in your brain first. Yeah. And so a lot of it is just abstractly thinking through the problem, trying to solve it, and then you go do the code. Which then breaks relentlessly because you forgot a period or semicolon in the wrong place. Then there's the fact that you're going to come back to your code months later, and you're going to go, what idiot wrote this code? I have no idea what's going on. When you're in the midst of writing it, you understand everything. And then 2 years later, you're going to inherit somebody else's code for this, and it doesn't have any comments in it. And yeah. So let's just look through 8,000 lines of code and tell me what's going on. No programming can do that. We don't know how to do that. That's not something that they teach. That's not something that's humanly possible. What this generally means is when you're doing coding, write yourself lots of messages. There are constructs in all coding languages called comments. HTML even does it. And you can just leave yourself a note. The next 100 lines will connect to the database and run this little function. Don't mess with this is usually the most common comment I've ever seen. I saw some that were, don't mess with this. When you'll try to optimize this code, and then when you find out that you've broken everything, add 1 to this number, 42. And it's every developer who tried to be smarter than the previous one, and no one could do it. But yeah, I've inherited systems before where I looked at it and I had no idea what was going on. I just wanted to kill the last person who obviously programmed it, and then I realized that's me. And this is not stuff that people deal with Photoshop and Illustrator. They don't need to worry about this kind of stuff typically. The closest I think you get is labeling your folders in the layers panel. Yeah, I want to kill somebody when they don't label those. But this is a much more complex than that, obviously. So I think programming is actually really rewarding. When stuff works and it works well, that's the greatest feeling in the world. I honestly wish that programming was taught in the elementary and middle school levels. So not just person anymore. That's where it should go. But even simple things like Lego Mindstorm. Has anybody gotten to play with those before? I haven't yet. Have you?
Those little Legos where you have to build a robot. I hated that thing.
Oh, sorry.
It made me so mad.
So, but with the whole programming thing, this is the trajectory that I usually find is first you got to figure out the language so you know what you're talking about, and then you've got to be able to talk to a professional, and then you got to know when to ask for help. And I swear to you, sometimes the best thing that you can do in a program is chuck it and start over. I honestly think that's the mark of a professional. It's going to take me 10 hours to solve this problem, or 2 to rewrite the whole thing and start over. Once you've made enough mistakes, you kind of start to learn that kind of mentality, how to find your own mistakes. Yeah, and Ken Thompson there. Yeah, I've done that. This isn't going to work. This is my big long list, but I figure if you need to get into web design, you're a print designer, what should be the steps that you actually do this? If you've got the little handout, I've got some websites there where you can actually go and look and see some of the different tutorial sites. HTML Dog is actually really, really good for the basic stuff, and the top one is the W3 Schools. I do like that one. It's not necessarily geared towards print designers or anything like that, but it's all of these are free, by the way. None of these actually cost anything. Unlike lynda.com, where you can get really high quality tutorials, but of course it's like $200 to get access to them or whatever. HTML and CSS, everything is predicated upon that. SQL stuff, all the PHP, all the JavaScript stuff, it doesn't function if you don't have HTML and CSS already on the page. HTML is dirt easy. CSS, it does a lot of animation. It'll do some of that. But sometimes you can actually make CSS do it a little bit easier. In the spring of 2014. PHP will do a lot of stuff, but it's really interesting. It's really useful once you actually start to get into databases. I recommend that you figure out PHP a little bit because it'll teach you the basics of programming, how to use variables and if statements, and get the computer to make decisions. Depending if the user clicks this one, then if it clicks this button, we should bring up this data. If the user clicks this button, it should bring up a different data. That's the kind of thing that PHP is good for to start with. SQL is weird. Once you've actually sort of seen all of this other stuff, SQL is just going to blow your mind. There's nothing like anything else out there. It's a language for constructing databases. It's also for interacting with them. They have an incredibly weird set of rules called normalization. Could you give me the first rule of normalization? First normal form? It's not the first rule of normalization. That's you don't talk about normalization. I couldn't do it off the top of my head. I can never remember. I've got them ingrained. When I'm building a database, I know them intrinsically now, but I couldn't actually give you what the rule. When I was learning it at first, I actually found a guy who knew SQL to show me. I kind of got the idea when certain things become different tables, but a lot of the where clauses where you're actually trying to ask the database for information, that tended to be the hard part for me. It took a long time to figure out joins. It takes everybody a long time to figure out joins when you get there. So when you finally have PHP and you've got a little bit of CSS, you don't need much. I mean, like if you play with each of them for a week, you're going to understand kind of what they're for. To combine them together, you create what's called a content management system, a CMS. You've heard of WordPress, right? That's where I'll have to get to last. I've got a very nice tutorial on how to do this. Meredith has done it. I'll show you how to create a blog engine using Dreamweaver. And I'll give you the link to it. Oh, there it is. The bit.ly link down there. That's 13J0J8K. And it's my Google Docs. I put all of the tutorials for web, all of them, all of the web classes up on Google Docs. So you can get to everything that I teach in this program.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I am noticing on Facebook and various places that you go that you have that kind of a...
Oh, it's called a URL shortener. So the actual Google Doc link is this long. And I don't want you to type that because you'll get it. I can't type it. So what you can go to bit.ly, bit.ly, and up at the top it says enter your URL. And I just pasted it in, and it gave me that back. And so that's now in their database forever. So if you go to this link, it'll go take you to the big one.
Okay, so it's a particular website that something
it's a
that
shortcut
does...
website. Steps 4, 5, and 6. Learning PHP, SQL, and actually building your own custom content management system. Sounds like, hell no, you're not going to do that. WordPress is probably the best place to start. It is all of those things already built together. Thousands of man hours have gone into polishing it, making the code very, very usable. The only thing that I recommend is that if you don't know any PHP or SQL, what goes on under the hood under WordPress is going to still be a black box of Harry Potter magic. Crack open the code. Every one of those pages, you can actually right-click, edit with Notepad or Dreamweaver, and look at what it does. I know you're not going to understand what it does, but you can look at it and you can see it. So with WordPress, you can easily create your own CSS designs, you can create plugins, you can add new pages, you can go in and change the functionality of stuff. It's highly customizable, and there are also millions of plugins that do all of that for you. And yes, doing WordPress sites is not cheating. think designers often think that because it's so incredibly easy to set up a WordPress site, but it's not.
It is to make it look like the template.
Yeah.
It's changed a little bit.
Yeah, just go ahead and change the templates just a little bit. It'll be fine. The client will never know. Then the last one is something called a PHP framework. If you're actually going to get serious about PHP, learning the coding language by itself is very, very useful, but slow and arduous. Because if you want to create the part where it actually, where you fill out a form and it sends that information to the database, that requires about 100 lines of code to make happen. There are frameworks out there that'll do it in like 1 or 2 lines of code. And you have to do a little bit of setup to tell Cake what your database name is, and the username and password, and then you can just write a few simple commands that go and access this larger library. Honestly, it's the exact same thing as classes in CSS. When you write a class name, it goes back to the CSS and refers to all of this style information, right? You can do the exact same thing with Cake and with jQuery. That's really what's going on. These are libraries of information. Cake has some very good tutorials. The other code igniter. If you get interested in this, one of the other big ones is Code Igniter. I know DaVinci downtown uses this one almost exclusively for all of their PHP projects. And I can't tell you that one's better than the other. Honestly, starting out, who cares? Pick one of them. Roll the dice and see which one you want to learn, and then get involved in the community and just start downloading tutorials. There is if you've got lynda.com, there is one video on PHP frameworks, and it kind of goes over these and Zend and Symfony. And it just kind of gives you a brief breakdown of what they do, what you can do with it, which doesn't make like a sense until you've done anything with PHP. If you haven't done anything with PHP, it's kind of like, you're just going to sit there like, I have no idea what these guys are talking about. And the last thing I like to leave people with is that you're not a real programmer until you created your first infinite loop. This is an infinite loop. It will always go back to 1. It will never stop. The computer will actually do that. That is entirely possible. You can destroy a computer that way. You will destroy it. You just need to yank the power cord out. So I hope that now you've got at least a better understanding of what's out there. I know it's kind of terrifying to see all of these. It's just an immense amount of stuff. But at least, especially with this one, you probably understand like what's going on, where things belong a little bit better. So let me just open up the floor now for questions. What is it you still don't understand about web design? Meredith, you're not allowed to ask me.
Why do different? I wanted to ask this when we had class, but I didn't. Why do different browsers run things differently? Did you ever hear the browser wars? Do you remember Netscape Navigator?
A long time ago?
Yeah, it was a long time. It's dead now. There actually still is a Netscape.com, amazingly enough. But they both had, Netscape used to be $30 to buy it. A browser that actually cost money. Because it was in the late 90s, that was what you do. You didn't give away software for free, at least not yet. That's not entirely true, but the commercial grade software you didn't really give away. And Microsoft said, we need to get on this bandwagon. So they made Internet Explorer, and it cost at first, but then they decided to integrate it in with Windows, just make it free, and you just get it with Windows. Well, Netscape actually sued them, and said, you can't do that. That's monopolistic. You're just destroying. You do that, we go out of business. And Windows said, and Netscape lost, and we don't hear about Netscape anymore. Well, then Internet Explorer started to stagnate around version 5 and 6. 6 didn't get updated for close to a decade before 7 came out. So that's where Firefox came in. And some other people had the same idea at the same time. Let's make a better browser. Apple wanted their own, because Internet Explorer, it ran on Macs, but it didn't do it well. So you can see that people just wanted to make new browsers. And they thought they could do it better than everyone else who was already in the market. And then we just ended up with a ton of them.
Okay, so everybody wanted to make them, but like IBM and PCs and Dell, and they wanted to make them different. I
Yeah.
mean, they're all basically deciphering the same information. Why don't they decipher it the same way?
Because, well, I'll tell you that Internet Explorer's rendering engine is called Triton. They own it. And and Firefox's is called Gecko. Get the right one. Unless that's Chrome. Let's say Firefox has Gecko rendering engine, and they own that. So if we wanted them all to be identical, everyone would have to agree on one rendering engine, and then we'd have to license it out to everyone. Guess what's not going to happen? That would involve too much money behind the scenes for stuff that just no one wants to pay for. So the rendering engines are converging. They're fairly close with the way that they do things. But there's a rendering engine that draws everything on the page. There's a different engine for running JavaScript.
So who designs those?
Different companies. Mozilla has their own. Internet Explorer has theirs. I'm pretty sure Safari and Chrome actually use the same engine. So those two are mostly identical.
Looks like Chrome just went to Blink, which is...
Oh, that's right. They were updating this
website
year.
point.
They were changing everything. And those are just the rendering engines. Then the JavaScript engines are something completely different. No, Blink is the JavaScript engine. They can do a better job than that guy over there. The browsers are produced here in the U.S. And there's Flock and SeaMonkey. They have hilarious names. I love the name Ice Weasel. And they all have their own rendering engines.
I guess the combat with Firefox.
Actually, a lot of those use the Firefox rendering engine, because that one is actually open source. Anybody can download that one and add it to their own projects if they want. But in order to integrate it with Windows, the Triton engine, that's an IE, actually does lots of stuff that no other program is allowed to do, because it's integrated with Windows. It's made by Microsoft. They can do whatever they want. So there's that. Okay, so what other strange and mystical things do
That's
you
sort
know about?
of interesting to know that there's an engine behind the engine.
Huh? Several. I think you actually go several layers deep. One of the questions I asked when I was first learning this stuff is, why do we have JavaScript and PHP? If you actually get down to doing them, they're both programming languages that work very, very similar. And the answer to that one, because every designer I know, when they try and get into it, they just want to pick one or the other, so they don't have to learn both of them, but you do, unfortunately. And it just has to do with the fact that JavaScript has to run in the browser, and PHP has to run on the server. PHP could never do animation. JavaScript is actually really bad at talking to databases. And as much as cool as it would be to find some way to combine them, it would have been done by now if that were entirely possible.
Speaking of JavaScript, why does it get so finicky about being kept up to date?
That's Java. And that is a completely different language. There's actually kind of a funny story behind that. When JavaScript was first coming out, it was called LiveScript. It was actually owned by Netscape. And at the time, in the mid-90s or so, Sun was the company that owned the Java programming language. and it was hot. Everybody was programming everything in Java. It was really cool, and everybody loved it. And everybody kind of hates it now, but so the people who are doing this live script, they paid Sun a ton of money to borrow the name. JavaScript then has nothing to do with Java. They're two completely separate languages. They have nothing in common. They don't do anything together. What's
There
that?
are actually similarities between the two. I did a whole paper on this for my Java class.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They're not derived from the same languages.
No.
I mean, they both
They
still
do have some
the basic
syntaxes
constructs.
that are the same. They're, yeah, I don't remember what was in my paper, but there are a bit of similarities.
When they came out, they were very, very different, or used for very, very different purposes, especially how they were compiled and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so Java wants updates, but that's something completely different.
But why does it do that? I mean, it's like it literally can shut your browser down.
It's another plugin. You can write. It's kind of like, think of it as Flash, a different type of thing from Flash, but along the same lines, you can write a JavaScript file that will run in a little window, the same way you can write a Flash file that runs
Can
in a
you
little
get rid of the
box.
plugin?
Can you what?
Can you get rid of the
I
plugin?
think so. You can uninstall it.
And what is ActiveX?
That's Microsoft's version of Flash type of technologies and Java stuff. Yeah, it's really annoying that there are millions of different plugins. You know, you've got to have Air, Shockwave, and Flash running. Why couldn't they just combine that into one? I don't know. I wish they could.
Yeah, Shockwave.
So what do you think of the future of Flash?
What's the future of Flash? I don't do too much Flash programming, but my opinion on it is that HTML5 is not mature enough to take its place. Everybody's saying Flash is going to die, and it's going to be replaced by HTML5. What they actually mean is JavaScript. There's a new tag in HTML called the canvas tag. You just say canvas / canvas, and then you can put as much JavaScript as you want inside that block, and it will do amazing, magical things. And I've seen some really cool stuff done with it. But at its core, it's really just JavaScript. And Flash can do a lot more. Flash has a lot of really cool integration with like the webcam connected to your computer. It can do lots of two-way communication. You can actually build a Skype type of thing. With JavaScript, it's more difficult. So I think Flash will probably eventually go away, but it's a ways off. I don't see how.
Maybe in the web world, but Flash is still pretty prominent in like the game development.
Video games? Yeah, that's been around forever.
I mean, I don't think you'll see very many websites that are designed with Flash, but because they've found other ways of making the same.
But it's the easiest way to program a game, or one of the easiest.
Yeah.
And I've met people with 1,000 other opinions. Some people say it'll be dead in a year. Some people say long live Flash. I don't know. It's kind of up in the air at the moment. It seems like it got stabbed pretty hard when 2 years ago Steve Jobs said no more Flash on the iPhone, and Adobe laid off like half of the Flash staff a year and a half ago. That was kind of scary. It was like, maybe Flash is going to die, but it's still here. People still use it.
What is scalable vector graphics?
SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. You can save an Illustrator file as a little tiny, it's effectively a little text document. And if you crack it open, it'll look kind of like HTML. It has little tags and delimiters. And then it has nothing but coordinates. So it's all the little points that you made in Illustrator. Most of the browsers will actually render this, and you can scale it to any size, just like Illustrator, so you don't have to really worry about file size. Problem is, it's just never really caught on. It's a cool format. I've used it a couple times, but all the browsers are okay with it. Nobody uses it. That's it. That's all there is to it. You used to need a plug-in to make them run, but I think that's actually been integrated into all browsers now.
For some reason, I have this idea, whatever the HTML5 with use scalable character graphics with a canvas and
Yeah, it's just not become very popular. I don't quite understand why. I would like to be able to have a vector format to use consistently. No, everybody kind of ignores it.
What's the biggest difference you see happening in the next, I'll say 3 years, between the web and portable, be it tablet, be it cell phone, programming? And what's the difference between programming for the web and programming for a tablet or a...
The big thing is that that's actually kind of a CSS question, because CSS is now being responsible for the whole responsive design, as it's called, where the same website looks this way on a big screen like this, it looks different on a tablet, looks different on a phone. And basically what you do is you just make 3 CSS files, and then you put them together and you say, between these pixel dimensions, use this design. Between these smaller pixel dimensions, use the tablet layout. The big problem with that is always, as you shrink down, what do you lose? Or how do you reorder things? How does your navigation change? And I guess you actually have to do 5 of them, because you've got your widescreen, you've got your tablet horizontal vertical, and your phone horizontal vertical. That's a big difference. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot more websites stop being apps, and you can actually do the app type stuff in the website, and it understands when it's on a phone and when it can access your camera and your GPS data. HTML5 actually has a geolocation ability now, and it will send back to the server it'll access the GPS on your phone or tablet and tell the PHP server where you are, and then the PHP server can say, oh, have a coupon for something that's right around the corner. You may have seen this in your phone browsing the web more recently, because Firefox and Dolphin and Chrome will all say, this website wants to know your location. Do you want to allow or disallow? And they just give you a little warning.
I think things are going to get a lot more simple and minimal just because it's easier to see on the phone. I think phones are becoming more popular than on the desktop.
I think you're right.
I mean, the whole glass design thing coming out now, it's mostly the phone.
Yeah. If you haven't seen this, there's new sort of trend in web design called flat design. Is that what you're doing for your next project?
So I'm trying to, but it's so hard to convince the client.
What is flat design?
It's exactly what it sounds like, flat colors. Forget the drop shadows, no bevels, no bosses, no little extra lines. Honestly, it's what Bootstrap is. It was kind of the big design push behind this whole flat theme now. If you get into Bootstrap, it's very, very flat.
Just flat design, you'll see a little sample.
What's your take on Muse?
On Muse, if you want to build a website that looks awesome fast, Muse looks like the coolest way to go. If you want to know what's going on or customize it, nope. I have looked under the hood of a couple of Muse sites. They are a mess. They're not well written, and the reason is because the computer, when they write this code, it has to work in everybody's sites, so they kind of make it bloated, so it'll figure out what it needs to do everywhere. It's not lean and customized for the exact application that you'll need. So you can open up the files in Dreamweaver, but God help you.
I actually built a site on Muse.
Oh yeah, I read that you were complaining about the editing.
It's very quick, very easy, everything works great. But yeah, like you said, you cannot customize it very well, and you kind of have to go with what their menu looks like and things like that. And actually, I tried one of the things that I wanted the most was the in-browser editing, so people could go.
So your clients can go and edit.
the site.
It doesn't work?
One of my clients tried to do it. He was using Internet Explorer. I don't know if that was it or what it was, but he changed the text, just what it said, just the words, and he saved it and published it. And the formatting was gone, but the bullets were gone, some of the graphics were gone. I had to go back and fix every page and format everything again.
Wow.
So
what's your opinion of Muse?
For building something quick and easy and that you want it to work and everything, it's fine. For a graphic designer, building a portfolio site, it's fine.
Yeah.
But
For showing the client what you wanted to do, maybe?
so, like maybe show a developer also like what you want it to look like, yeah, that would work too. But if you want to get into making it really customized and making it really your work and working with the client and stuff, it's not
I agree.
And giving client access is not a good idea.
no. At least not.
Because we asked April that, if you recall. We asked her, can the client go in and make changes? And she said, yeah.
Demonstrated it, I thought.
Yeah, but I think she did a laptop at the end, so I don't know if I wrote But
It's also a fairly new technology. I'm not surprised that they're
yeah, I
still
think
close
it
with it.
maybe get better later, but right now
Lisa, you've got to have questions.
I have so many we would actually
Let's go.
be
Come on,
here
come on.
for.
Debbie.
Oh, I don't know.
There are no dumb questions, because I guarantee there's someone else in here who feels like they'd be an idiot if they asked such a simple question.
I mean, you've answered a lot of them, but you've been fun enough about my question, my very basic question.
So over at FCC, you guys don't get into PHP or do you get into JavaScript?
Maybe in the Web 2 class.
And even then, it's probably just you remember the rollover buttons. Yeah. It's kind of nice that, I mean, there are lots of tools out there that will do all this stuff for you. Like, there's a CSS gradient generator. I love it. It looks like Photoshop's gradient thing. And you can just, little sliders on the web, and just click it and then bam, just gives you all the CSS code. Copy, paste, done. I have no idea how it works. I don't care. It works.
CSS is not, Google is the best. Just say CSS, round the corners, and then
Yep.
something finds the code and you discover it.
Yeah. I'm not sure if eventually Google becomes your teacher.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Okay, you got your degree and you're teaching and you have to stay at least 2 steps ahead of your students. How much of your time do you spend doing that, or would a normal developer person spend, because the industry is changing exponentially?
I'm kind of in a fortunate position because of that. Because this is just a 2-year program, I teach the basics. And honestly, the basics haven't changed in a long time. The biggest upheaval for me was HTML5, CSS3, and more recently it's been jQuery. And this year I'm trying to find a good framework for PHP for the Web Developer 2 students to start to chomp down on. But a lot of it is filtering out what's essential and what's, remember the giant list with the swirl going in the air of all the extra stuff? What kind of belongs in that category in my mind? The stuff that if you go out into the real world and you want to become a YAML expert, well, I'm not going to teach you YAML, I'm going to teach you the core stuff that lets you understand YAML. Because somebody else is going to go out and pick Moo tools, and someone else is going to pick jQuery. But if I teach you the basics of JavaScript, it's going to go everywhere. Except I guess jQuery is now like 95% of all JavaScript development.
But how much time do you actually
How much
spend
time?
doing that?
All the time I spend on the web. I don't know, what is it? 16 hours a day. Honestly, I would say 10% of my time I try to go out and find what the new technologies are. A lot of it is following what you post on AIGA Facebook. Some of it's a few web design podcasts. Boag World is one that everybody loves. I won't say that. It's just one guy who's kind of an average web designer who just spouts on endlessly about web design. But he's become a big magnet for where the community is. Trying to find, using a list apart, the TUTS websites, NetTuts, PSD Tuts, and Smashing Magazine. They'll tell you what the cool new things are. And then even though something cool is out there, I kind of have to wait until it hits a certain threshold before I have to care about it. When jQuery came out, it's like, oh, okay, this is a cool new thing, and then 10 others popped up around it. And jQuery became the dominant leader in that JavaScript framework field. Okay, that's the one we should probably learn now.
So it's a matter of sorting the wheat from the chaff. A lot.
Yeah. There's a lot of crap out there.
And deciding what's useful and what's not, maybe using something and saying, eh. Or recognizing that it's a lot like this other thing you already know how to use.
Yeah.
Oh, they just tweaked it to make it.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
I imagine a lot of these are probably industry specific. Maybe the fact that they're like a trade journal. Okay, if you're doing water decontamination, you're going to do one thing. If you're an architect for a building, you're trying to do something else.
There are some divisions like that. Some of them have to do with the type of server that it's on, which is usually, there's lots of factors that determine what type of server, operating system you put on the server. Most of them are designed, I would actually say, they're designed to be as generic as possible, because they want broad, wide appeal so that they get popular and used a lot. Like, you can do the same stuff with Moo tools as you can with jQuery. With just everybody, hey, jQuery is the cool thing, let's go there, and there's 10 times the amount of developers producing stuff for it.
And does that, going back to that, does that matter with the browsers?
Not really. jQuery especially, the people who, the incredibly smart programmers behind it, specifically created that so that all the weird little quirks with JavaScript that happen in all the different browsers, they get smoothed over. They actually have exceptions in the jQuery library that say, oh, you're on IE6, here's the stuff that IE6 needs to do, and IE7 needs to do these couple of things. Chrome's fine, and Firefox needs these couple of things. And it takes care of that.
That's cool.
Yeah. That was one of the reasons why it became so incredibly popular.
What would be your top 3 tips for a print designer starting the adventure web?
jQuery is going to be the most fun. Go there. I kind of assume you already figured that one out. For the programming side of things, yeah, jQuery is fun. Go through one of those tutorial sites. Code Academy is pretty darn good because it's interactive. You actually type in the code, and then it tells you what you did right and what you did wrong. And become addicted to coffee.
Yes.
What about pitfalls? Are there pitfalls that they should look for? like, I'm just getting into this and I'm spending too much time on, you know, or is there are there a couple of things that you should be like alerted to that you're doing something wrong or need to change?
Doesn't work.
Take your time. Do it right.
You can, because no one's going to pay you if you do. Yeah, it's just like design, where it's still very deadline heavy. You're expected to turn around code very, very quickly. I don't know. Pitfalls.
Like every beginning web designer does this wrong.
Rookie mistakes.
You'll hear people in this field say you've got to learn CGI or Perl or Python or some of the older languages that are out there. And they will tell you, I've had programmers tell me I am not a programmer because I don't know COBOL. It's like, nobody cares about COBOL anymore. That was one of the languages that was responsible for Y2K. So it's like 40 years old. And you may have heard of CGI, Python, and Perl. They were older web programming languages. People tell you I've wasted time learning those languages when I could have been doing something in PHP, because hardly anyone uses them anymore. Pick a couple of languages that you want to learn that you think are going to be useful and stick to them. Become good at them. Don't get sidetracked on a million other things that people are going to tell you. The big one right now you're going to hear about is Ruby on Rails, which is this crazy new way of doing things that's really cool. It's kind of a competitor to PHP. I already know PHP, and I really don't want to learn Ruby on Rails. It sounds like a cool idea, but I'd rather get better at PHP than invest in another language that does the same thing.
So as long as you can accomplish what you want to accomplish, it doesn't matter?
And your computer is not obsolete as long as it can still run the software that you want. But everyone keeps telling me, my computer's slow and I can't run these anymore. My computer's slowed down over time. Now you've got a bunch of crap in your start menu. Let's restart it and just, as long as you've got something that can do what you want, you're doing good. You don't need to chase all the latest bells and whistles. Just because jQuery's out there doesn't mean you gotta learn it. It helps a lot, but
I think a really good thing is to learn like good practices in writing code. Keep it organized and kind of have an order for your madness. Because at some point, 2 years later, you're going to have to go back and look at it and you're going to be like, what?
The comments thing. Always leave yourself notes.
yourself knows.
I'm not great about commenting, but I've always make sure I keep everything separated.
I agree. Yeah, there are a couple of different, I can't remember any of them off the top of my head, but there are a couple of different methodologies for programming and for writing comments. Find one or develop your own and follow those patterns so that everything is, you can look at your code and you can kind of at least tell where things are and stuff like that. And leave yourself comments. Oh, dear God, Captain Picard will not let you.
Now, I said go slow because theoretically you lose periods and semicolons and things when you're going fast, and thought you put it there, but you sped by it, and then you spend 3 hours looking for something that if you'd taken 2 extra seconds, it would have been there.
That's why it's important to do one thing at a time. Like, get a website and you're programming it, get your, obviously your container and everything, but when you start coding your navigation bar and all that stuff, get that set with the dimensions you did, with your 8 CSS, get all that set, and then move to the next thing, and then move to the next thing. Because when you're programming something like that, your first, your initial thing is just get it all in there and then mess with it. And then that's when you usually go back and say, why isn't this working? and then that's when you have to go searching for something for a period.
So in that case, it's opposite of design. You're not working, you do have the framework, but you're putting in each piece at a time, as opposed to putting it all in and then moving it.
Yeah, I would say typically the way that I like to program is I write down all the functions that I'm going to create. Which is basically, it's a block of code that does one thing. It takes some code in and like the information when somebody fills out a form. It'll take in all of that information and it'll throw it in the database. It'll check it and make sure it's all right. It does that one thing and does it well. So I'll write that function and then all the other functions, and I kind of write down a note of what it's supposed to do. What's supposed to go into the function and what's supposed to come out of the function. And I just write all of those. And then I go back in and fill in the guts of every one of them. And then you have to test them out, make sure they work and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of how I do my HTML as well. I write in all of the divs, and then I go to the CSS and write a selector for each one, and then I go in and start filling in the content and more of the design.
So figure out what you want it to do first.
There was one quote I didn't get up here, but it was solve the problem first, then go write the code.
Or you do it like I do, just complete opposite.
Most people do. Most people just run in, you just start coding, and I don't know what I'm doing. And sometimes you just need that cathartic part of it to get your brain going in the right direction. I've written programs that I knew I wasn't going to use in the end one, but I need to figure out how something works. I need to solve this problem. I need to make the computer solve this real world problem, and I have to abstractly beat the computer into submission. So I write a program that kind of does it. Oh, I figured it out. Now I'm going to go do the real one and add it in. Sometimes you have to do little prototypes like that.
How many average functions are in a website? On average?
Again, that depends on the size. I couldn't even imagine how many are in Facebook. I mean, literally talking tens of thousands. Has to be. With the little the content management system tutorial that I've got, there's probably about 50. But Dreamweaver generates most of them for you too, which is nice. Oh yeah, you will eventually outgrow Dreamweaver. I probably told you this if you're in the web design class, but
Outgrow what?
Dreamweaver. Most of the developers don't use it. It's great for getting stuff down, for using it as a code editor, but the design view often gets thrown away. People don't use it quite as much anymore.
It helps me figure out the CSS. That's pretty much why I use it.
Yeah.
So what do you usually write for?
Notepad++.
Really?
Yep.
Oh my god.
There are actually what are called IDEs, Integrated Development Environments. One of the more popular ones, which is also free, is called Eclipse. And it's sort of a generic programming program, but it has a module for PHP, and it has a module for Java, and a lot of the other languages that were up there.
I'm not being surprisingly nice.
I'm always complaining on Facebook that Dreamweaver is crashing again or something. And I have a developer friend that's always telling me, don't use Dreamweaver, use Coda, use
Notepad++ is great. The only thing I really like about Dreamweaver is if you start typing an HTML tag, it'll finish it out for you, and then write in the closing tag. I wish Notepad would do that.
But I like Notepad++ because if there is a missing bracket or whatever, you can line it up.
Where it is.
Yes. I will actually copy paste PHP code or other code in there just to see what's going on.
A lot of developers, just about everybody at DaVinci downtown, the last couple of times they have Dreamweaver on their computers, but they're all working in Notepad, especially for PHP. For HTML, CSS stuff, Dreamweaver is, I can do that in a very short amount of time and know what's going on. PHP,
So Dreamweaver's for the routine stuff that...
PHP is, Dreamweaver has some PHP stuff in it. It doesn't have a lot. I mean, it really only has like 50 things out of 10,000.
Oh.
So it'll get you the basics. It's a good learning tool for PHP to start out with, but you'll outgrow it quickly. Crap, 7:30. Guys want to go to the bar?